There are moments when all you want is not to explode, not to answer on impulse, not to let a cutting word, an unexpected disappointment, an injustice at work, a silence at home, or an old memory drag you into that state where it feels as though someone else has taken the wheel of your mind. And perhaps the most exhausting part is not even the emotion itself, but the feeling of losing yourself inside it. As if, for a few minutes, or sometimes for days, you stop being who you really are and become governed by a storm rising from within. If you have lived that, and almost every human being has, then perhaps this message is arriving at the right time. Because Stoicism does not teach you to become stone. It does not teach you to suffocate your feelings. It does not teach you to become cold, distant, or indifferent. What it teaches is something far rarer, more mature, and more liberating. How to feel without being carried away. How to notice emotion without becoming its slave. How to move through inner chaos without losing your calm, your dignity, or your clarity. And there's one detail here that very few people notice. Calm is not the absence of emotion. Calm is the presence of awareness. Calm is remaining whole when everything inside you is demanding that you react. If this kind of reflection speaks to the season of life you are living through, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write the word calm in the comments, not as some casual gesture, but as a small, private commitment to yourself. Because sometimes transformation begins like this, when a person decides they no longer want to live at the mercy of whatever they feel in the moment, and begins to build a strength that does not shout, but sustains. Perhaps you were taught, throughout life, to believe that there are only two possible paths in the face of emotion. The first is to explode. The second is to swallow it. Either you pour everything out onto the world, hurting, breaking things, regretting it later, or you lock everything away in silence, harden your face, clench your jaw, and keep storing weight inside your chest until it becomes exhaustion, bitterness, anxiety, insomnia, or emotional distance. Many people live swinging between these two extremes, without realizing that both are born from the same lack of inner mastery. Both the person who reacts too much and the person who represses too much are still being controlled by emotion. One becomes a hostage to excess, the other to denial. And this is where Stoic wisdom begins to open a third way, a subtler way, a harder way, but an infinitely more powerful one. The way of lucid observation, the way of feeling, naming, understanding, filtering, and choosing. The way of not denying emotion, but also not kneeling before it. Marcus Aurelius, a man surrounded by wars, betrayals, disease, political pressure, and crushing responsibility, wrote to himself like someone trying to protect his own mind from turmoil. Seneca observed that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Epictetus insisted on something that remains unsettling even today. It is not things that disturb us, but the judgments we make about them. And notice the depth of that. They were not saying that pain does not exist, that loss does not hurt, that humiliation does not wound, or that fear is imaginary. They were saying that between the event and the inner devastation, there is a space, and that space goes unnoticed by almost everyone. In that space lives interpretation. The silent conversation you have with yourself lives there. The meaning you assign to what happened lives there. The story you form about yourself, about the other person, about the future, about what this event proves lives there. And it is at that point that emotion often stops being merely a natural response and starts becoming a prolonged prison. Think of an ordinary situation. Someone does not reply to your message. The fact by itself is simple. One unanswered message. But within minutes, the mind begins to work. I was disrespected. She does not care about me. They're ignoring me. Always get left aside. People only come to me when they need something. See how? In a matter of moments, reality left the realm of objective fact and became a pain-filled narrative. The emotion that comes afterward is not born only from the lack of a reply. It is born from the story you built around it. And that story can awaken anger, insecurity, humiliation, abandonment, distrust, resentment. This is where many people get confused. They believe they're reacting to life, when in truth, they are reacting to the mental film they produced about life. Stoicism begins to restore calm precisely when it teaches us to separate what happened from the interpretation we made of what happened. That separation seems small, but it changes everything. Because when you confuse fact with interpretation, you give emotion absolute power. But when you learn to look and say, this is what happened, the rest is what my mind is adding, something very important begins to be born. An inner distance, and not a cold distance. A wise distance. The distance that prevents every emotion from becoming a command. The distance that allows you to breathe before you respond. The distance that saves relationships, preserves decisions, and protects your peace. Maybe you have felt this in arguments. Someone says something that touches a sensitive point. In a second, the body heats up, the chest tightens, the mind accelerates. You are no longer listening to the person. You are listening to the wound. And when a wound is listening, everything becomes distorted. The tone sounds harsher. The intention seems crueler. The threat feels larger. So, you react. And later, when the dust settles, that bitter question appears. Why did I say that? Why did I let myself get carried away again? Stoicism does not promise that the body will stop reacting. It does not promise that you will never again feel anger, hurt, or fear. What it offers is something more realistic and more human. The possibility of not immediately obeying what you feel. It sounds simple when spoken aloud, but it is one of the greatest revolutions of adult life because emotional childhood is marked by impulse. Maturity begins when a person discovers that feeling does not require acting, and there is a quiet beauty in this. You do not need to defeat emotion with violence. You do not need to wage war against yourself. You do not need to feel guilty for feeling. The first step of Stoic calm is almost always this. Stop treating your own emotion as an enemy. When you fight brutally against what you feel, you create a second pain on top of the first. It is no longer enough that you are afraid. Now you judge yourself weak for being afraid. It is no longer enough that you are sad. Now you accuse yourself of not snapping out of it. It is no longer enough that you are angry. Now you despise yourself for having lost your composure. And in that way, the soul begins to split into layers. The lucid Stoic does not do this. He acknowledges, there is anger in me right now. There is fear in me. There is a sadness visiting me. Notice the difference. He does not say, I am anger, I am fear, I am sadness. He says, there is. That creates space. That prevents fusion. That restores inner government. There is a detail here that few people notice when they try to control their emotions. Wanting control is not about squeezing tighter. It is about seeing more clearly. Most people think of control as muscular restraint of the soul. But in Stoic philosophy, true mastery begins with discernment. You observe what you felt. Ask what triggered it. Investigate the judgment behind the emotion. And only then decide what deserves to be fed and what needs to be weakened. That requires practice and daily practice. It is not an instant miracle. It is almost like strengthening an invisible muscle between stimulus and response. At first, you notice the emotion after you've already reacted. Then you notice it while you are reacting. Later, you notice it seconds before. With time, you begin to recognize the earliest signs. The heat rising, the impatience arriving, the thought becoming catastrophic, the interpretation becoming dramatic. And that early recognition is precious, because emotion is much easier to guide when it is still a wave, not yet a tsunami. Today, people speak a lot about emotional triggers, but not everyone understands what that means in practice. A trigger is not just something that irritates you. Many times, it touches an old story about personal worth, rejection, control, injustice, helplessness, abandonment, or humiliation. That is why two people can face the same situation and react in completely different ways. A criticism, for one person, is just information. For another, it is experienced as a deep attack on their very worth. A delay, for one person, is an inconvenience. For another, it is intolerable disrespect. A silence, for one person, is a pause. For another, it is emotional abandonment. Stoicism invites us into this rare honesty, to admit that the world does not always disorganize us because of what it is, but because of the point it touches in us. And that perception, far from weakening us, strengthens us. Because when you identify the wound, you stop blaming the entire universe for what must be understood within yourself. Seneca spoke of anger as a brief kind of madness, not because the angry person is evil, but because, for a few moments, that person loses proportion, loses measure, loses hierarchy. The small seems enormous. The momentary feels final. The discomfort feels unbearable. The other person starts being seen in a simplified, almost cartoonish way. Always, never, everything, nothing. It is remarkable how intense emotion impoverishes thought. And here there is a quiet key to calm, recovering nuance. When the mind begins speaking in absolutes, mature awareness reintroduces complexity. It is not, no one respects me, but this situation made me feel disrespected. It is not, my life is a disaster, but I am going through a difficult season. It is not, I failed, but something did not go the way I hoped. It is not, this person is terrible, but this person acted badly toward me in this moment. It may sound like wordplay, but it is not. It is mental hygiene. It is the difference between being swallowed by a totalizing interpretation and seeing reality with greater precision. Marcus Aurelius had the habit of reducing things to their essence. He looked at luxury and said, "Dye cloth," at fame, noise made by human mouths, at another person's anger, the movement of a confused soul. There was a technique of freedom in that. When you strip away from a situation the extra drama that imagination has placed upon it, it loses part of its power to dominate you. This does not mean trivializing pain. It means removing the fantasy that amplifies it. How many times have you suffered more because of what you imagined would happen than because of what actually happened? How many nights have you lost inside mental scenarios that never came true? How many conversations have you held in your head, stockpiling anger before truly hearing the other person? Stoicism calls you back to what is very often is simpler than the panicked mind makes it appear. But there is a delicate point here. Many people hear about Stoicism and imagine a person who does not cry, does not feel, does not get moved, does not show emotion, does not let anything affect them. That caricature completely impoverishes the philosophy. The Stoic is not an anesthetized being. He simply does not make emotion the sovereign center of his conduct. He can feel sadness without turning sadness into surrender. He can feel fear without turning fear into flight. He can feel anger without turning anger into cruelty. He can feel pain without turning pain into identity. And that is deeply human, because the problem is not feeling. The problem is handing your direction over to passing states. Emotions are waves. When you build your house on them, you live in permanent ruin. When you learn to observe them from firmer ground, they passed without taking your essence with them. Perhaps, at this point, it is worth noticing something very practical. Losing your calm rarely begins in the moment of the explosion. It almost always started earlier, in small inner concessions that kept building up. Unrecognized fatigue, unrealistic expectations, excessive control, lack of palsy, a buildup of unprocessed irritations, hostile inner dialogue, poor sleep, a life lived on autopilot, an overloaded body, a speeding mind. And then it takes only one small event for everything to overflow. This matters because it reminds us that calm is not just an emergency response. Calm is a way of life. Serenity in crisis is usually built during ordinary days, in the way you organize your rhythm, filter your thoughts, handle your schedule, your expectations, and your need to keep everything under control. Epictetus taught that some things are up to us and some are not. This distinction, repeated so many times, risks sounding too simple, but it touches the heart of emotional balance. Much of human agitation comes from the constant effort to control what was never in our hands, the other person's reaction, the past, recognition, the final outcome, the timing of things, other people's opinions, the full course of events. When you place your peace in territories you do not govern, you inevitably live vulnerable. Every delay destabilizes you. Every criticism undoes you. Every rejection redefines you. Every unexpected event feels like a personal offense. Stoicism restores sobriety by reminding you your true sphere is smaller but powerful. What is within your reach is your intention, your judgment, your choice, your posture, your speech, your character, your response. And though that may seem less than we would like, that is exactly where real freedom lives. Think of the peace that exists in truly accepting this, not as a beautiful phrase, but as a practice. Someone was unjust with you. You do not control that person's conscience, but you do control whether you will answer with the same mud. A plan failed. You do not control the past of that decision, but you do control the lucidity with which you will learn from it. Fear of the future appeared. You do not control tomorrow as a whole, but you do control the next step. Someone you love changed toward you. You do not control their heart, but you do control the honesty with which you will act. See how this does not reduce the pain, but it reduces the scattering. The mind stops running in 100 useless directions and returns to the only place where dignity can be exercised, the present of conscious action. And there is something beautiful, almost sacred in this return to what depends on you. It restores dignity, even on difficult days. Because there are days when you cannot prevent sadness, but you can choose not to degrade yourself inside it. Days when you cannot change the news you received, but you can decide how you will walk through it. Days when the heart is tired, but the soul can still be honest, generous, and sober. Stoicism is not triumphalist. It does not demand that you be fine all the time. It simply invites you not to abandon your own center when life is not in your favor. Perhaps you have noticed that some emotions seem harder to control because they give an illusion of power. Anger, for example, makes a person feel strong at the exact moment they are actually vulnerable. Resentment gives a sense of moral righteousness while corroding from within. Anxiety makes it seem as though thinking more will protect you from everything, when often it only amplifies suffering. Attachment to control creates the impression of safety, but produces rigidity and exhaustion. There is always some hidden reward in certain emotional states, and that is why sometimes we cling to them without realizing it. The mind prefers a sense of false control to a lucid surrender to what it cannot govern. And here lies one of the rarest forms of courage: giving up the fantasy of total control. Calm is not mastering the world. It is stopping the demand that the world behave properly so that you can feel at peace. That sentence, when taken seriously, deeply changes the way a person lives, because most daily irritations are born from a secret negotiation we make with reality. I am okay if people are polite. I am okay if everything goes according to plan. I am okay if I am recognized. I am okay if no one contradicts me. I am okay if no one disappoints me. But life does not sign that contract. So we live in constant friction with the real. The Stoic matures when he understands that peace must be sturdier than circumstances, not because he enjoys discomfort, but because he has stopped depending on an impossible perfection in order to sustain his inner order. There is another point Stoicism reveals, and it touches deeply those who have already lived a lot. Not every emotion needs to be resolved the moment it arises. Sometimes urgency is the trap itself. You feel something and believe you must act immediately, answer immediately, decide immediately, explain immediately. But intense emotions distort. One of the most practical ways to preserve calm is to delay your response without denying the feeling. This affected me. I will look at this more clearly later. That small discipline saves friendships, marriages, work environments, and one's own conscience. Because there are words that leave in 1 minute and create damage that lasts for years. There are decisions made in the heat of humiliation that sabotage the entire life path. There are breakups born not from a final truth, but from a temporary emotional state treated as an absolute truth. And perhaps you are beginning to see that. Controlling emotions, in the Stoic sense, is not a single act, but an inner culture, a way of educating the gaze, a way of relating to yourself. You begin to notice patterns. You begin to see which thoughts inflame you, which interpretations make you sick, which conversations exhaust you, which environments make you reactive, which expectations make you more fragile, which habits leave your mind more vulnerable to excess. Little by little, you become less surprised by yourself. And that is liberating, because part of human suffering comes from the fact that a person goes through life discovering themselves too late. They only notice their pride after they've already wounded someone. They only notice their neediness after they have already begged. They only notice their fear after they have already retreated. They only notice their anger after they have already destroyed. The Stoic's inner work is to anticipate awareness. Perhaps you have noticed that some people remain calm not because they have fewer problems, but because they have made peace with certain fundamental truths of existence. Impermanence, for example. Almost everything changes. Bodies change, relationships change, seasons change, desires change, conditions change, cycles end. A huge part of emotional dysregulation comes from trying to hold on to what is already changing. We suffer not only because of loss, but because of resistance to loss. Not only because of endings, but because of our refusal to accept that many things were never meant to last in the form we wanted. Stoicism prepares the soul for this moving world, not to make it cold, but to make it capable of loving without the illusion of possession, capable of enjoying without arrogance, capable of caring without believing it controls destiny. Marcus Aurelius contemplated transience as a way of awakening sobriety, not to fall into pessimism, but to live with greater awareness. When you remember that everything passes, your impulses lose some of their tyrannical force. The offense of the day shrinks. Anxiety about the future finds a limit. Pride relaxes. The compulsion to win every argument reveals itself as childish. And then calm ceases to be only a mental technique and becomes a spiritual consequence of realizing that life is too brief to waste on petty reactions, ego battles, and unnecessary wars. And there is something even deeper. Many times what we call a loss of calm is underneath a loss of identity. You react too strongly because you confused yourself with the image you want to uphold. You need to appear right, strong, respected, admired, invulnerable. So any threat to that image becomes a threat to your very being. But when awareness deepens, you realize that you do not need to defend a character all the time. Someone can disagree with you without destroying who you are. Someone can fail to approve of you without diminishing your worth. You can make a mistake without becoming a mistake. You can fail without becoming a failure. You can be misunderstood without falling into desperation to correct every other person's perception. There is immense serenity in no longer carrying the burden of appearing flawless. Perhaps that is why Stoicism, though it may seem like a philosophy of discipline, is also a philosophy of relief. It relieves the soul from the impossible task of controlling everything, proving everything, answering everything, winning everything. It returns focus to what is essential. What kind of person do you want to be when you are provoked? What kind of presence do you want to offer when someone is hurt? What kind of awareness do you want to cultivate when you are alone? What kind of character do you want to sustain when no one is applauding you? These questions reorganize life. They replace the obsession with the external by faithfulness to the internal. And when the center changes places, calm becomes more accessible. There is also a very intimate relationship between calm and truth. Whoever lives deceiving themselves emotionally loses their own axis. They say they did not care, but they cared deeply. They say they forgave, but they still keep feeding the scene in their mind. They say they are only concerned, when in truth they are consumed by fear. They say they are demanding, when they are actually controlled by anxiety. They say they are honest, when they are simply discharging aggression. Stoicism asks for the courage to name things as they are, and that inner honesty is medicine. Because whatever is not recognized rules from the shadows. What is clearly seen, on the other hand, begins to lose its power to manipulate silently. Perhaps you have felt this. Emotion gets worse when you run from it without understanding it. You distract yourself, keep busy, turn on the television of the mind, run to your phone, to work, to food, to haste, to excessive talking, but it keeps pulsing underneath. The Stoic does not drown an emotion, but neither does he flee from it in a childish way. He sits before his own inner state and asks, what exactly disturbed me? What am I telling myself about this? What am I afraid of losing? What am I trying to control? What is this emotion asking for? What does it reveal? What in it is legitimate and what in it is exaggerated? These questions are quiet but transformative. And notice this. They are not questions meant to intensify the drama. They are questions meant to dissolve confusion. In many cases, intense emotion protects something more vulnerable. Anger protects sadness. Irony protects insecurity. Coldness protects fear of being hurt. Excessive control protects helplessness. Cynicism protects disappointment. When you begin to see that, something softens. You stop being merely reactive and become understanding toward yourself, not permissive understanding. That is very different. Permissiveness says, that is just how I am. Mature understanding says, I understand what is happening in me, but I am not going to surrender blindly to it. That is the voice of calm. There is also an extremely powerful Stoic practice for moments of disturbance, asking what virtue is asking of me in this situation. Not pride, not impulse, not the need to win, but virtue. What is lucidity asking of me? What is justice asking of me? What is courage asking of me? What is temperance asking of me? What is dignity asking of me? In a world increasingly governed by instant reaction, that question rebuilds the human being from within, because it takes you out of the logic of how I felt and brings you into the logic of who I choose to be. And perhaps that is one of the most beautiful definitions of maturity, not being merely the sum of the day's emotions, but the conscious expression of a cultivated character. Imagine the power of that in a concrete situation. You were offended. Your impulse wants to strike back harder. But then the question arises, what does dignity ask? Perhaps silence for a few hours? Perhaps a firm reply without humiliation? Perhaps distant? Perhaps a clear boundary? Notice that calm is not passivity. Stoicism does not command you to accept abuse with a smile. It teaches you to act without disfiguring yourself, to set boundaries without losing measure, to say no without setting everything on fire, to be firm without becoming barbaric. That is refined strength. That is power with awareness. The same logic applies to fear. When anxiety arrives, it usually pushes the mind into the whole future at once, everything at the same time, every bad possibility, every possible loss, every threatening scenario. Stoicism contracts that inflated horizon and asks, what is the real, present, concrete part one can deal with right now? And that restores sobriety. Instead of fighting an imagined future in one giant block, you focus on the next real gesture, one conversation, one phone call, one decision, one step, breath, presence. Fear feeds on the distant. Calm grows in the immediate. Perhaps you have already noticed that people who are deeply agitated inside often confuse intensity with depth. They think feeling more strongly means feeling more truthfully. But that is not always so. Sometimes intense emotion is simply a disordered reading. Sometimes the person who speaks the loudest understood the least. Sometimes desperation is not the sign of greater love, but of greater attachment. Sometimes the most theatrical indignation does not reveal superior ethics, but a wounded ego. Stoicism dismantles this worship of intensity and values clarity. Not everything that is strong is deep. Not everything that is quiet is weak. There is a calm strength that needs no spectacle to be real. And there is a very important point for anyone who wants to apply this in daily life. Calm is first practiced in small things, in traffic, in lines, in delay, in immature comments, in domestic inconveniences, in changed plans, in frustrated expectations. In those seemingly trivial situations, the mind reveals its habits: impatience, rigidity, the need for control, dramatization. If you only try to be stoic in major crises, you'll probably fail. Serenity in large storms is trained in small annoyances. Whoever learns not to catch fire over little things strengthens the scent of greater pains. There is a quiet exercise here. Whenever something frustrates you, before reacting, ask whether it truly deserves the price of your peace. Not everything does. Not every opinion needs a response. Not every criticism requires a defense. Not every provocation deserves an arena. Not every failure deserves self-destruct. Not every mistake made by someone else demands your full emotional participation. Sometimes preserving calm is an act of economic intelligence. You stop spending vital energy on small battles so that you can be truly present for what matters. Perhaps someone will ask, but what about when the emotion is huge? What about when it is not a small inconvenience, but a real loss, a grave injustice, a deep fear, an enormous disappointment? Stoicism works there too, but differently. In those moments, it does not ask you to pretend you are fine. It asks you to move through pain without handing your soul over to despair. The difference is enormous. There are sufferings that need to be felt: grief, farewells, irreversible failures, family crises, illness, breakups. Stoicism does not dehumanize that. It simply protects awareness so that pain does not become degradation, so that suffering does not turn into cynicism, brutality, chaos, or self-abandonment. Seneca, who also knew loss, understood that the wise person may cry. The problem is not the terror. The problem is inner shipwreck. There is a noble sadness that honors what was loved, and there is a disordered sadness that drags a person toward destruction. Stoicism helps distinguish between the two. You may suffer and still maintain minimal rituals of order. You may suffer and still refuse to wound those around you. You may suffer and still refuse to turn pain into an excuse to abandon everything that sustains your integrity. That is not coldness. It is respect for yourself in the midst of vulnerability. There is also a very stoic way of looking at others that greatly helps preserve calm. When someone acts with rudeness, selfishness, ingratitude, or arrogance, it is easy to feel as though we have been personally attacked by a calculated evil from the universe. But Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that people do wrong out of ignorance of the good, out of confusion, out of limitation. That does not cancel their responsibility, but it changes your reading of them. You stop seeing the other person as some metaphysical monster sent to ruin your day and begin to see them as someone governed by shadows. You may know yourself in other degrees. That vision reduces the personalization of conflict. And when everything stops being so personal, the soul breathes more freely. In fact, one of the quietest causes of losing calm is excessive personalization. You interpret almost everything as commentary on your worth. The other person's mood becomes a judgment about you. Their distance becomes lovelessness. Their refusal becomes humiliation. Their mistake becomes an affront. Their delay becomes existential disrespect. And so life becomes emotionally heavy, because everything pierces you as though it were centrally about you. Stoicism offers a quiet relief here. Not everything is about you. Sometimes the other person is simply tired, distracted, confused, limited, immature, busy, or wounded. That perception does not solve everything, but it prevents a great deal of unnecessary suffering. Perhaps you are beginning to see that stoic calm is not apathy. It is emotional intelligence rooted in philosophy. It is a way of living that unites self-awareness, discernment, boundaries, humility, and courage. And there is an almost spiritual dimension to all of this. The trust that you do not need to react to everything in order to exist. You do not need to prove your strength in every confrontation. You do not need to win every interpretation. You do not need to be loud in order to be firm. You do not need to be hard in order to be solid. There are people who, after reaching a certain maturity, discover that real power began when they stopped wasting energy trying to control the tide and started steering their own vessel. And how is this cultivated in daily life? First, by slowing the mind enough to notice it. Whoever lives in constant speed has little chance of observing their own judgments. Second, by training more precise inner language. Instead of everything is lost, saying, "This is difficult, but I can deal with one part of it right now." Instead of "I cannot take this anymore," saying, "I am overloaded and need to reorganize." Instead of "No one understands me," saying, "I am feeling alone in this experience." These small corrections are not self-deception. They are faithfulness to reality without unnecessary amplification. Third, by accepting that not every emotion must be obeyed simply because it was felt. Fourth, by daily remembering the distinction between what depends on you and what does not. Fifth, by building enough inner life that the external world is not your only emotional regulator. That means creating spaces of silence, moments of pause, readings that elevate, conscious breathing, reflective writing, walks without noise, honest contact with yourself, not as spiritual luxury, but as hygiene of the soul. A mind constantly invaded by stimuli, comparisons, news, tension, and the excess of other people's opinions tends to become more reactive. Calm needs inwardness. It needs an inner place you can return to when the world is agitated. The ancients knew this intuitively. Today, perhaps more than ever, we need to rediscover it. And there is also the discipline of reviewing the day, something deeply Stoic. At the end of a day, asking yourself, where did I lose proportion today? What interpretation inflamed me? What emotion did I try to repress instead of understand? Where was I ruled by impulse? Where did I manage to create space before reacting? What did I learn about myself? This review is not meant to feed guilt, but awareness. Guilt paralyzes, observation transforms. Little by little, you become a student of yourself, and that changes everything. Because whoever studies themselves honestly loses innocence in the face of their own mechanisms. Perhaps, deep down, the great promise of Stoicism is not simply to control emotions, but to free a person from the slavery of reactivity. It allows them to inhabit their own life again with greater presence, to stop living dragged from one side to another by impulses, fears, interpretations, and impossible demands, to discover a calm that is not the absence of pain, but the presence of an axis, a calm that does not depend on outer silence, but on some inner order, a calm that is not born from perfect circumstances, but from the integrity with which you move through them. There are people who reach a certain age and realize, with sadness, that they spent whole decades reacting to family, to work, to frustrations, to opinions, to mistakes, to losses, to expectations. They almost never stop to govern themselves. They almost never ask who they were becoming in the middle of all that. Stoicism is an invitation to interrupt that autopilot, to stop being only a surface beaten by the winds and become depth. Because the surface is stirred by any movement, depth remains. Perhaps you are living through exactly the season in which this wisdom is needed. A time of many triggers, much fatigue, much accumulated anxiety, much inner friction. Perhaps you recognized yourself in many of these scenes. The good news is that calm is not a gift reserved for a few privileged temperaments. It is a practice. It is a cultivation. It is a moral, mental, and spiritual construction. Naturally restless people can become more serene. Impulsive people can become more aware. Anxious people can become more present. Wounded people can learn not to turn every new situation into an automatic repetition of old pain. But that requires commitment, not to an idealized image of perfection, but to small daily fidelities to one's own awareness. At first, perhaps you will still lose your calm. Perhaps you will still react before noticing. Perhaps you will still feel the old urge to control what escapes you, answer what wounds you, anticipate what frightens you, dramatize what hurts. But now you will know something you may not have known before. Between you and the emotion, there's a space that can be widened. And inside that space lives your freedom. Your dignity lives there. The possibility of choice lives there. Do not choose from the wound when you can choose from clarity. Do not choose from panic when you can choose from presence. Do not choose from pride when you can choose from character. Because, in the end, losing calm is not only a bad moment. Many times, it is a temporary abandonment of yourself. And recovering calm is coming home again. Returning to the center. Returning to the part of you that can look at its own emotion without servitude. Returning to that quiet point where the mind does not need to run. The ego does not need to defend itself all the time. And life does not need to obey completely in order to still be lived with nobility. Stoicism teaches that. Not to kill the heart, but to educate it. Not to deny the storm, but to learn to move through it without letting it decide who you will be. So the next time something strikes you, perhaps you'll remember. Breathe before the verdict. Observe before the impulse. Name before reacting. Separate facts from interpretation. Ask what depends on you. Ask what virtue is asking of you. Ask whether this deserves the price of your peace. Ask what kind of person you want to emerge from this situation when it is over. And perhaps, just perhaps, you will notice in that moment a subtle change, almost invisible to others, but immense for your soul. The emotion is still there, but it is no longer on the throne. And that is one of the most beautiful signs of inner maturity. Not to stop feeling, but to stop being governed by everything you feel. In the noisy world we live in, keeping calm has become almost an act of spiritual resistance. Nearly every stimulus demands an immediate reaction. Nearly every platform feeds continual outrage. Nearly every comparison wound. Nearly every hurry. That is why conscious serenity is worth so much. It is a form of lucidity, a way of not handing your mind over to collective chaos, a quiet refusal to live in a permanent state of alarm, a decision that your inner life deserves more respect than the culture of reaction gives it. And when you begin to live this way, something changes not only inside you, but around you. Your presence becomes less combustible. Your relationships breathe more easily. Your words come out cleaner. Your decisions carry less regret. Your body suffers less unnecessary wear. Your mind finds more ground. And the most beautiful thing is that this calm does not need to be displayed. It appears in the way you listen, the way you answer, the way you wait, the way you endure, the way you say no, the way you accept, the way you begin again. It is strength without spectacle, firmness without hardness, a peace that does not depend on the absence of problems, but on the presence of inner government. Perhaps life will never stop bringing setbacks. Perhaps you will still face losses, injustices, misunderstandings, fears, and days when your chest tightens without warning. But there is a decisive difference between a life dragged by emotions and a life guided by awareness. One is unstable by nature, the other may shake, but it does not lose itself so easily. And perhaps that is the deepest gift of Stoicism, teaching that calm is not a prize granted to the lucky, but a discipline learned by those who decide not to abandon themselves anymore. If today you are tired of living on the edge, tired of reacting more than you would like, tired of letting small things steal your peace, begin with something simple. Do not try to transform your whole self in one day. Just observe better. Just distrust the first impulse a little more. Just wait a few more seconds before answering. Just treat your emotion as a visitor, not as a king. Just return to what depends on you. Just preserve in the middle of the noise, a small space of lucidity. That is how a life begins to change from within, not through one grand dramatic gesture, but through a quiet repositioning of the soul. And when you practice this long enough, you will discover something no one can fully explain with theories, because it must be lived. There is a calm that is not weakness, not passivity, not humiliated silence, not fear of confrontation. It is a calm that comes from the strength of someone who no longer needs to be dragged by every wind. A calm born from clarity about what is yours and what is not. A calm that looks at emotion and says, I hear you, but I am the one who chooses. A calm that may not make life perfect, but makes you more whole within it. And in such confusing times, becoming whole may be one of the deepest forms of wisdom.